My niece spent $6,300 overnight. My silent revenge left the whole house screaming. I came home that night bone tired, the kind of tired that clings to your skin even after a shower. I've been grinding for weeks, juggling work bills and the weight of keeping 5 people afloat under one roof. All I wanted was silence and maybe 10 minutes alone with my thoughts. Instead, my niece looked up from the couch, phone in hand, and said it so casually it almost slipped past me. "Oh, I just used your card for snacks." Her voice was light, careless, like borrowing a pen. I froze. Something in her tone, it wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a question. Just entitlement wrapped in a teenager's shrug. Later, when I opened my laptop, the truth hit me like a car crash. Not snacks, not gas money. $6,300 gone. Louis Vuitton. A pair of sneakers worth more than my monthly utilities. Skincare I'd never heard of. Even a deposit on some wellness retreat. My hands trembled on the keyboard. My chest hollowed out like someone had scooped me clean. That money wasn't play money. It was survival, the last rope keeping me from sinking. I knocked on my sister's door near midnight. She opened it, half asleep, irritation etched across her face. I told her what her daughter had done. She blinked, yawned, and said the words that broke something inside me. Kids will be kids. That's it. No anger, no apology. Just dismissal. As if $6,300 was pocket change. As if my exhaustion meant nothing. Something inside me went still. Not explosive rage, quiet razor-sharp clarity. I didn't argue, I didn't scream, I just nodded and walked back to my room. At 1:17 a.m., while the house slept, I opened every account and began freezing cards one by one. Sub-accounts gone, retailer logins wiped, auto payments cut off. I moved like a surgeon, precise and cold. By the time dawn pressed through the blinds, I wasn't the same person anymore. I wasn't their safety net, their excuse, their endless bailout. I stared at my screen, the digital locks snapping into place, and thought if I keep rescuing them, I'll drown with them. And I refused to go under. At 6:00 a.m., I was in the kitchen making coffee, trying to quiet the storm inside me, when a piercing scream ripped through the house. My niece. The kind of scream that usually signals tragedy. Except this time, it was over the disappearance of her shiny new toys. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Her father. His voice wasn't worried. It was furious. Why aren't the cards working? Why can't we order breakfast? Why is every account locked? He barked questions like a drill sergeant, never pausing long enough for me to answer. I listened to every word, then hung up. No explanation. No defense. Just silence. The house transformed into chaos. My sister stormed through the hallway, muttering rhetorical questions meant for me to overhear. How could Abigail do this to us? Her husband paced the porch, chain vaping and calling anyone who'd listen about how I had humiliated his family. And my niece? She sat in the living room, clutching her phone like a lifeline, crying not over the money, but over handbags and sneakers being refunded before she could flaunt them online. Meanwhile, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee like it was armor. Not a word passed my lips. I wanted them to feel the silence pressing down, to realize they weren't victims, they were thieves. And I wasn't going to soften the blow this time. By noon, my sister finally broke the standoff. She walked into the kitchen, arms crossed, and said, "We need to have a grown-up conversation." I agreed, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to hear just how far they twist this story. We sat across from each other in the living room, the air heavy, like a negotiation about to collapse. She started with, "Your reaction was extreme." Then came the excuses that I embarrassed them, that I destabilized their family, that I should have talked to them first before cutting access. Her husband chimed in, saying I had damaged the trust between us. My niece added her own insult, claiming the shopping spree made her feel in control of her life. I stared at them, wondering if they'd all lost their minds. They weren't ashamed. They were angry at me. That was when I finally spoke. My voice was steady, sharp as glass. "I have less than $300 to my name because of you? I've worked double shifts. My daughter gave up her room. I've carried you for 6 months and you're calling me extreme. Do you even hear yourselves?" For the first time, their faces shifted. My sister started to cry. Her husband looked at the floor. My niece stormed off without a word. But I knew then this wasn't an apology. This wasn't a turning point. This was them waiting for my anger to pass so they could go back to draining me dry. When I came back the next morning, I noticed an envelope on the kitchen counter. It was just lying there, half buried under a pile of yesterday's unopened mail, my name written across the front in rushed, uneven handwriting. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe a check, some gesture of repayment, or at least a detailed plan. Instead, I found a single piece of paper. 7 words. "We're sorry. We'll fix it." That was it. No money, no strategy, not even a hint of how they intended to fix anything. Just a vague promise written like a note you'd pass in middle school. I set the paper back on the counter, almost laughing at the absurdity. For 2 whole days, I left it there untouched. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I saw it, a pathetic attempt at accountability staring back at me. They tiptoed around me as if the act of being quiet could erase what happened. My sister suddenly started doing little things like rinsing out her coffee mug and folding blankets on the couch. Her husband, usually loud and demanding, walked softer, speaking less. Even my niece, the one who drained my account, started taking her shoes off at the door, as if small courtesies could erase $6,000. But all of it felt hollow. They weren't sorry. They weren't planning to fix anything. They were just waiting. Waiting for me to cool down, for the tension to ease, for life to slip back into the cycle where I carried everyone while they coasted. One night, I was sitting at the dining table paying bills and realizing just how thin things had gotten. My electric bill was already late, and I had less than $300 to my name. I glanced at my daughter's backpack and the corner school supplies I'd stretched to afford things she never complained about, even though she deserved better. And here I was, sitting in a house where grown adults ate my food, used my utilities, and drained my accounts without shame. I heard soft footsteps behind me. My niece appeared scrolling through her phone, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She dropped onto the couch and said casually, "Hey, can you help me rebuild my Amazon cart? Everything got refunded and I can't remember what I had saved." I froze. That single sentence felt like a slap. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. She wasn't apologizing, she wasn't even embarrassed. She was inconvenienced, like I'd ruined her life by taking back what was mine. I turned slowly to look at her. Her face was calm, unbothered. She didn't see the damage she'd caused. She only saw the interruption to her little world of online shopping and instant gratification. "You want me to help you rebuild a cart full of things you bought with my stolen money?" I asked quietly. She blinked, shrugged. "Well, yeah, it's not a big deal. We'll figure it out. You don't have to make it dramatic." I bit down on my tongue so hard it hurt. If I said another word, I knew I'd explode. So I stood up, walked past her, and shut my bedroom door. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of them laughing at some TV show in the living room. Their voices floated through the house like ghosts, lighthearted, careless, while I stared at overdue bills and counted down days until rent. And it hit me with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt this wasn't about the $300 anymore. It was about me, about how I'd allowed this cycle to keep draining me month after month, excuse after excuse. I wasn't just losing money, I was losing pieces of myself. I thought about my daughter who had been sleeping on a mattress in my room for 6 months because I'd given her bedroom away. She never complained, never once asked why her comfort mattered less than theirs. But I knew. I saw it in her eyes when she tried to do homework on the edge of my bed while their daughter had a whole room to herself. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who worked hard, budgeted carefully, dreamed about saving for a better future. And I realized that woman had been buried under the weight of people who saw me not as family, not as a person, but as a lifeline to use until it snapped. Lying there in the dark, I whispered to myself, no more. No more vague apologies. No more empty promises written on scraps of paper. No more sacrificing my daughter's comfort and my own sanity for people who refuse to stand on their own. They thought I was going to let it pass. They thought I'd eventually forgive, forget, and reset the balance like I always did. But this time, I wasn't going back. Something inside me had shifted. The boundaries I'd been too scared to enforce before were now the only thing keeping me from disappearing entirely. And once I drew that line, I knew there'd be no crossing it again. Because promises without action mean nothing. And I was done waiting for them to change. The next evening, I sat at the dining table long after everyone else had gone to bed. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood. A stack of unopened mail sat beside me, bills I'd been too tired to face. I pushed them aside and pulled out my laptop. For the first time in months, I wasn't scrolling for distraction or numbing myself with late-night shows. I was strategizing. I opened 3 local job boards, browsed listings until my eyes blurred and started printing. Host positions at chain restaurants, cashier openings at grocery stores, warehouse shifts, remote customer service roles. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would stroke anyone's ego, but jobs that paid money. Real work. I organized them into piles by who they could suit best. My sister could manage retail. Her husband could handle warehouse or delivery shifts. My niece, God help me, could at least start with something entry-level and learn the basics of responsibility. I added handwritten notes in the margins, bus stop 2 blocks away. Flexible schedule could fit around school hours if she ever tried. Entry-level, no experience required. I was spoon-feeding opportunity to people who had taken everything from me. But a part of me still clung to the irrational hope that maybe if I made it easy enough, they'd take the first step. By 2:00 a.m., I had 3 neatly stapled packets. They sat in a small stack on the dining table, heavy with my frustration, and yet still padded with my stubborn loyalty. I told myself this was my last effort. If they ignored this, I would know for certain where I stood. The next morning, I brewed coffee and waited. When they finally shuffled into the kitchen around noon, I called for a family meeting. My sister raised an eyebrow, her husband sighed like I'd interrupted his morning routine of doing absolutely nothing, and my niece plopped down with her phone in hand, not even pretending to care. I laid the packets on the table. "These are job listings," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've already highlighted the ones you could apply to today. You don't have to thank me. But if you want to keep living here, you need to start contributing." My sister blinked at me. "You stayed up all night. Doing this?" "Yes, because I can't keep supporting 5 people on 1 salary." Her husband leaned back, crossing his arms. "It's not that simple. Then explain what's complicated about it," I shot back. He didn't answer. He just stared at the wall like the conversation was beneath him. I turned to my niece. "These jobs won't last forever. You're 18. You need to start building something for yourself." She rolled her eyes. "I'm not desperate enough to flip burgers." I felt the words like a knife twisting in my gut. Desperate enough to steal $6,000, but not desperate enough to earn your own. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. Instead, she stood up, snatched her packet off the table, and without even glancing at it, tossed it straight into the trash. The sound of it hitting the bin echoed louder than her words. I'm not working some loser job, she said flatly. I looked at my sister, waiting, begging for her to say something. To scold her daughter, to apologize, to show even an ounce of responsibility. But she just sat there, lips pressed into a thin line, silent. That silence said everything. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. So that's it then. You don't want solutions. You just want me to keep sacrificing until there's nothing left. No one answered. The air between us was thick, suffocating. Later that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling again. Only this time, the clarity I'd felt before had sharpened into something colder, harder. The woman they thought they could walk all over was gone. If they wouldn't fix it, I would. And fixing it meant something drastic, something final. Because this wasn't about job listings anymore. It was about survival, mine and my daughter's. By morning, I had already made up my mind. No more half measures, no more quiet sacrifices that went unnoticed. If they couldn't read the job packets, if they couldn't take even the smallest step toward fixing what they broke, then I had to spell it out in a language they couldn't ignore consequences. I brewed a pot of coffee, set 3 mugs on the table, and waited. My daughter had already left for school. Thank God she didn't have to see this. Around 10, my sister stumbled in her hair, tied back carelessly, eyes glued to her phone. Her husband followed 15 minutes later, smelling like cheap vape juice, yawning, as if life itself had exhausted him. My niece finally appeared at nearly noon, wearing a hoodie that probably cost more than my electricity bill, her face glued to TikTok. I didn't wait for them to settle in. Sit down, all of you. Something in my voice made them obey. I looked each of them in the eye. My sister avoided my gaze. Her husband smirked like this was a performance he'd already seen, and my niece crossed her arms defensively. You have 14 days to leave this house, I said flatly. For a second, no one reacted. Then my sister's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. I am. Her husband leaned forward, his tone sharp. After everything we've been through, you're just throwing family out like garbage? I kept my voice calm. Family doesn't drain me dry and call it stability. Family doesn't shrug off $6,000 like it's pocket change. Family doesn't teach their child that theft is kids being kids. You've mistaken me for your safety net. That ends now? My sister's eyes brimmed with tears. We're not ready. We don't have savings, no plan, nothing lined up. That's not my responsibility anymore, I interrupted. I gave you options, jobs, resources, time. You spat on all of it. I turned my gaze to my niece. And you throwing away job listings like you're too good to work. Do you know how insulting that is? You want control. Here's your control. 14 days. Figure it out. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Just pulled her hoodie strings tighter and looked away. My sister sobbed quietly into her hands. Her husband muttered curses under his breath. The 3 of them sat there like I just ripped the floor out from under them. And maybe I had, but what they never seemed to understand was that they had been standing on my floor all along. I stood up the decision final. 14 days. I'll even help you find storage for your things. But after that, you're out. No one followed me when I walked back to my room. The silence in the kitchen felt heavier than any shouting match could have. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Because finally, I was reclaiming my home. The days after I gave them the 14-day deadline were eerily quiet, almost staged. My sister moved more slowly, like she was carrying invisible weights. Her husband stopped making sarcastic remarks at me in the hallway, though I caught him muttering under his breath on the porch when he thought I couldn't hear. My niece avoided me altogether, staying in her room for hours, headphones blasting bass so loud the walls shook. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, the thick, pressurized air that tells you something violent is about to break. I tried to focus on work, on my daughter, on anything that reminded me I had a life outside of this chaos. But the resentment sat in my chest like a stone. They weren't packing. They weren't searching for apartments. They weren't even pretending to apply for jobs. They were just waiting. Waiting for me to change my mind like I always had before. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, I came home early. The living room smelled faintly of perfume and nail polish remover. My niece was stretched out on the couch, shopping bags piled around her like trophies. Sephora, Nike, Zara. My stomach clenched. Where did you get the money for this? I asked. She didn't even flinch. Relax. Dad gave me some cash. I turned to my brother-in-law, who was sitting on the porch just outside scrolling his phone. With what money? You don't even have a job. He shrugged. Pawn some tools. Don't worry about it. It wasn't the answer, it was the tone. That lazy, dismissive tone that said my outrage was a joke to him. Something inside me snapped. Pack it up, I said. My niece blinked. What? Pack it all up. Every single thing you bought. We're returning it? Now. She laughed. Actually laughed, like I was some overbearing mother who just didn't get it. You can't tell me what to do with my stuff. My voice dropped to a whisper, the kind that carries more weight than shouting. It's not your stuff. It's stolen stability, and I'm not watching you burn my house down with your greed anymore. She rolled her eyes, muttered something under her breath, and then, without warning, grabbed my coffee mug off the table and hurled it against the wall. The shatter was deafening. My daughter, who had been in her room, came running out wide-eyed and frightened. That was it. The final straw. I stood frozen for a moment, not from fear, but from clarity. This wasn't a family I could save. This was a fire I had to put out before it consumed everything. I turned to my sister and her husband, who had rushed inside at the sound of breaking ceramic. 14 days just became 10, I said. My voice didn't shake. 10 days to be out of my house. After that, I'll change the locks. No one argued this time. They just stared at me, stunned, as if they were finally realizing I wasn't bluffing. The 10-day clock started ticking the moment those shards of ceramic hit the floor. I swept up the broken mug myself, each scrape of the broom against tile sounding like a countdown drumbeat in my head. 10 days. That was it. The house felt different now. Not quieter, more tense, like every wall was listening. My sister barely spoke to me. When she did, her voice was soft trembling, as if politeness might buy her more time. Her husband stayed out late, coming home smelling of cigarettes, avoiding eye contact. My niece sulked in her room, headphones permanently glued to her ears. But the change wasn't in them, it was in me. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the confrontation. I wasn't apologizing in my own house. Every night, I reminded myself, this is your home. You pay the bills, you set the rules. On day 8, I printed out a formal notice. 10 short lines, black ink on white paper. You have until date to vacate the premises. Keys will be deactivated. Storage unit available if needed. I taped it to the fridge where no one could ignore it. The first reaction came from my sister. She cornered me in the hallway that night, her face streaked with tears. Please, she whispered, we're not ready. We don't have anywhere to go. I met her eyes. I wasn't ready either when I had to build this life alone. But I did it, so can you. Her lip quivered, but she didn't argue. She just turned away. On day 6, my niece finally spoke. Not to apologize, not to acknowledge what she'd done, but to demand. You're really going to throw your family out like we're trash? I stared at her. Family doesn't smash mugs at their aunt's head when she tells the truth. She flinched, looked away, and muttered, you'll regret this. On day 3, the energy shifted. Boxes appeared in the hallway, clothes stuffed haphazardly into bags. The smell of stale perfume and takeout lingered heavier, like they were trying to leave a mark on the house itself. I watched it all without comment. I cooked dinner for my daughter, helped her with homework, folded laundry. Life went on even as theirs was unraveling. By the final day, the guest room was nearly bare. A single pair of flip-flops sat by the door, abandoned, like a reminder that even when people leave, they tried to leave their mess behind. I woke up at 6 that morning, heart-pounding, expecting one last fight, one final guilt trip. Instead, I found the house empty. No note, no goodbye, just silence. And in that silence, for the first time in 6 months, I could breathe. The morning after they left the house felt foreign in its own quiet. I padded into the kitchen, expecting to hear cabinets slamming or the endless drone of TikTok videos, but there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of my daughter's laughter drifting from her bedroom. I stood in the doorway of the guest room, the room they had claimed for 6 endless months. The bed was stripped bare, the closet doors hung slightly open, and the carpet was littered with crumbs and bits of torn shopping bags. They hadn't even bothered to clean before leaving. For a moment, I felt a rush of anger, but then surprisingly, relief drowned it out. Their absence was the cleanest thing they had left behind. My daughter helped me drag the remaining trash bags to the curb. She didn't say much, but the way she smiled when we pushed her keyboard back into the corner of the room told me everything. That music room had been hers before all this began, and now it was hers again. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I opened my bank app, my breath tight in my chest. The balance stared back at me, $6,997. Not everything I'd lost, but close enough. I had recovered most of it through returns, through sheer stubbornness, through refusing to let their recklessness drown me completely. I stared at that number for a long time. To anyone else, it might have looked small. To me, it looked like survival. 5 days later, my phone buzzed. It was my sister. I let it ring out, but curiosity got the better of me when the voicemail appeared. Her voice was fragile, worn. We're staying with an old friend for now. He's trying to keep the restaurant job. I don't know if it'll last. She's not speaking to me. She says we ruined her life. I know we messed up, but I hope you won't shut us out forever. I played the message twice. Then I deleted it. Because I wasn't shutting them out of spite. I was shutting them out to survive. That night, I tucked my daughter in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, we're safe now. Her sleepy nod was all the confirmation I needed. The voicemail should have shattered me. 10 years ago, maybe even 5, I would have raced to call her back to soothe, to offer money I didn't have. But this time was different. This time I listened with new ears. Her voice wasn't filled with true accountability, it was filled with fear. Fear of losing her safety net, fear of having to face the world without me patching every hole. I sat there on my couch, phone in my hand, and realized something important. She wasn't mourning me. She was mourning her own comfort. That night, I pulled out a notebook and wrote a single line across the page. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. The next morning, I woke up to 3 more missed calls. My father's old phrase echoed in my mind, family sticks together. But as I stared at the glowing screen, I wondered what does it mean if the only one doing the sticking is me? Around noon, a text arrived, this time from my niece. Just 4 words, you ruined everything. I stared at it, the audacity of it, and something inside me cracked, not from sadness, but from disbelief. After everything I had done, this was her takeaway. I didn't respond. Not to her, not to my sister, not to any of them. I blocked the numbers and set my phone down. For the first time in months, maybe years, silence wasn't suffocating. It was peace. Later that week, my daughter and I went grocery shopping together. It was a small thing, but as we laughed in the produce aisle and argued over which ice cream to buy, I realized this is what stability feels like. Not chaos, not crisis, just Normal. My sister's message lingered in the back of my mind, a ghost tugging at the edges of my conscience. But then I asked myself, and I'll ask you the same. At what point does forgiveness turn into self-destruction? At what point do you stop being family and start being a lifeline for people who refuse to swim? I think I finally found my answer. 10 days after cutting contact, I woke up to a quiet house. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but whole. My daughter was at the kitchen table humming as she worked on her music. Sunlight spilled across the floor. No tension, no slammed doors, no chaos. Just peace. That's when it hit me. Peace feels unnatural at first if you've lived in dysfunction too long. You almost don't trust it. But slowly, it starts to feel like home. I thought about my sister's message about the words. We know we messed up, but I hope you won't shut us out forever. And maybe one day I'll soften. Maybe. But forgiveness without change is just another invitation to repeat the cycle. And I can't afford that anymore, not for me and not for my daughter. So I wrote a final letter. Not to send, but to remind myself. I don't owe anyone access to my life just because we share DNA. Love doesn't erase accountability. Blood isn't a free pass to drain me dry. Family doesn't mean servitude. It means respect. I folded the letter and slipped it into the same envelope that once held their flimsy apology note. 2 different pieces of paper. 2 entirely different truths. That night, my daughter hugged me before bed and said, "It feels like we have our house back." And she was right. It wasn't just the house. It was me. So I'll ask you, the ones listening, the ones who've maybe felt the same weight. What would you do if the people you love keep confusing your kindness for weakness? Would you keep giving until you're empty? Or would you finally choose yourself? Because that's what I did. I chose me, and I don't regret it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your own thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to cut family off to protect your peace?